Imagine being down on your luck, bills piling up, and trying to make ends meet for your kids. That was the reality for Sarah, a single mother working 2 jobs, barely scraping by. Every day was a battle between exhaustion and hope. And though she did her best to stay strong, it was getting harder with each passing week. Little did she know, one ordinary day, her life would take a turn in the most unexpected way. It was late afternoon, and Sarah had just finished her shift at a local diner. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the quiet suburban streets as she drove home in her beat-up car, the same one she prayed wouldn't break down on her again. She sighed, thinking of her kids waiting at home, wondering what kind of dinner she could whip up with the little food they had left in the pantry. As she turned onto a long rural road, she noticed an elderly man standing by the side of the road, looking lost and a little distressed. His car, an older model that had seen better days, sat there with its hood open, smoke billowing out. Sarah's heart went out to him. She could tell just from a glance that he was stranded and probably didn't have anyone nearby to help him out. She debated for a moment. Should she stop? She barely had enough gas to get home, let alone drive around helping others. But something in her gut told her to pull over. Sarah rolled down her window and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The old man looked up, relief flooding his tired eyes. "I've broken down and my phone's dead. I don't have any way to call for help," he said, his voice soft but tinged with desperation. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped out of the car, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she walked toward him. She offered to give him a ride to the nearest town so he could call for assistance. He was hesitant at first, not wanting to be a burden, but eventually he gratefully accepted. As they drove, Sarah couldn't help but notice something different about this man. His clothes, though simple, had a certain quality to them. He wasn't like the average person stranded on the road. He was calm, composed, and had an air of dignity that she couldn't quite place. Still, she brushed it off. After all, appearances could be deceiving, and what mattered most was that she was helping someone in need. The man introduced himself as Mr. Wilson, and as they drove along, he began to ask Sarah about her life. She didn't reveal much at first, not wanting to burden a stranger with her struggles. But something about him made her feel at ease. Before she knew it, she was sharing bits and pieces about how hard it was being a single mom, juggling jobs, and worrying about her children's future. Mr. Wilson listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. He seemed genuinely interested in her story, which surprised Sarah. She wasn't used to people caring much about her problems. Most were too wrapped up in their own lives. As they neared the town, Mr. Wilson turned to her and said, "You've been through a lot, haven't you? Life hasn't been easy on you." Sarah smiled faintly, shrugging. "I just do what I have to for my kids. We'll get through it." There was a moment of silence before Mr. Wilson asked something that caught her off guard. "What would you do if your life changed overnight?" Sarah laughed softly. "I'd probably think it was a dream," she replied, not thinking much of the question. After all, nothing ever came easy for her, and the idea of her life suddenly turning around seemed too far-fetched. But little did Sarah know, the man sitting next to her was far more than he seemed. He wasn't just any elderly man in need of a ride. He was, in fact, a millionaire, one who had lived a life of wealth and privilege, but who also knew the value of kindness and generosity. And though Sarah couldn't have known it at the time, this simple act of stopping to help him was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Just as they arrived at the town and pulled up to the gas station where Mr. Wilson could make a call, he turned to Sarah, a warm but mysterious smile playing on his lips. "Thank you, Sarah," he said softly, his eyes gleaming with a hint of something unspoken. "You've done more for me today than you'll ever know." Before she could ask what he meant, Mr. Wilson stepped out of the car, leaving Sarah with a sense of curiosity and confusion. What exactly had she done for him? And why did his words feel like more than just gratitude? As she drove away, her mind buzzed with questions. She had no idea that this chance encounter, this small act of kindness, would set off a chain of events that would transform her life forever. Because what Sarah didn't know was that Mr. Wilson had plans, big plans, that involved her and her children. As Sarah drove away from the gas station, she couldn't shake the strange feeling left behind by Mr. Wilson's words. What had he meant by her doing more for him than she could know? It seemed like such a simple act of kindness, just helping someone in need. But there was something about the way he had looked at her, a glint of knowing in his eyes, that made her wonder if there was more to the story than she realized. The rest of the night passed as usual. Sarah went home, made dinner for her two kids, and tried to ignore the growing list of bills on the counter. Her daughter Lily was struggling with school, and her son, Ethan, needed new shoes for his upcoming soccer game. All the worries of being a single mom weighed heavily on her as they sat around the small kitchen table, talking about their day. But even amidst the chaos of everyday life, her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Wilson. Something about him stuck with her. His calm demeanor, the way he'd listened to her so intently, and of course, that strange parting line. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was just being polite. But deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't the last she'd hear from him. The next day, as she headed to work at the diner, Sarah still couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. She didn't expect anything to come of it, but there was an uneasy feeling in her chest. Was she overthinking it? Probably. After all, Mr. Wilson was just an old man in need of help. Still, that nagging feeling lingered. Later that afternoon, as she bustled around the diner, balancing plates and pouring coffee for the regulars, she noticed a well-dressed man walk in and take a seat by the window. His suit was crisp, and he looked out of place in the modest little diner. Sarah approached him, ready to take his order, when he looked up, smiled, and handed her an envelope. "This is for you," he said softly, his tone polite but firm. Sarah blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" The man shook his head, still smiling. "No, but you helped someone yesterday. A Mr. Wilson." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I did. Is everything all right?" "He's perfectly fine." The man reassured her. "He just wanted to make sure you received this." He gestured toward the envelope. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it. Inside, she found a neatly folded letter, and her hand shook as she began to read. It was from Mr. Wilson. In the letter, he explained that he had been testing her, a test of character. He'd once been in a position much like hers, struggling to make ends meet and feeling like the world was against him. But through hard work and a bit of luck, he had turned his life around, becoming a wealthy businessman. He hadn't forgotten where he came from and made it a habit to help those who showed kindness to others, just as Sarah had done for him. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the letter was something that made Sarah's heart pound in her chest. A check. And not just any check. It was a life-changing amount of money, enough to pay off all her debts, provide for her kids, and give them the future she'd always dreamed of. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at the man, speechless. "He wanted you to know that he believes in second chances," the man said gently, "and he wanted to give you yours." For a moment, Sarah didn't know what to say. It was too much to process all at once. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life. At least not to her. And yet, here it was, right in front of her, like something out of a movie. But as the shock began to wear off, another emotion slowly crept in. Doubt. Could she really accept this? She'd never been one to rely on handouts. Her entire life had been a fight for survival, and she'd always prided herself on her ability to provide for her kids, no matter how tough things got. Taking this money, even if it meant changing everything for the better, felt like admitting defeat. Could she live with that? Days passed, and Sarah wrestled with her decision. The check sat untouched in her purse as she went about her routine, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to take the leap, to give her kids the life they deserved, without the constant fear of financial ruin hanging over their heads. But another part of her was terrified. What if there were strings attached? What if she regretted it? The kids noticed the change in her mood. Ethan asked why she seemed distracted, and Lily, though young, could sense something was off. Sarah didn't want to worry them, so she tried to keep up appearances, but her mind was constantly racing. Then, one evening, as she was tucking the kids into bed, Lily asked a question that stopped Sarah in her tracks. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Sarah's heart sank. Her daughter, at just 7 years old, was already aware of the weight of their situation. She had never wanted her kids to feel that burden, but she could no longer deny that they deserved better than the life they were living. The knock on the door made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It was late, far too late for a casual visit. Her mind raced, trying to figure out who it could be. Was it Mr. Wilson? Had he come to check on her after sending the letter and the check? Or was it someone else entirely? Slowly she stood up, the phone still in her hand, and made her way to the front door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there was the well-dressed man from the diner, the same one who had handed her the letter. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Mr. Wilson, a warm smile on his face. Despite the late hour, Sarah was speechless, her mind unable to comprehend what was happening. "Mr. Wilson," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" He stepped forward, his smile gentle but reassuring. "I know it's late, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to see you again. I had a feeling you might still be undecided." Sarah blinked, her mind still racing. "Undecided?" she echoed. Mr. Wilson nodded. "About the check. About the help I offered. I've been where you are, Sarah. I know how hard it is to accept something like this, to trust that it comes with no strings attached, but I wanted to personally tell you, in case my letter wasn't enough. You deserve this." Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Everything she had been feeling, doubt, fear, uncertainty, it all came rushing back. She glanced down at the check still clutched in her hand, and then back at Mr. Wilson. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "It just doesn't feel real. Why me? Why would you do this for someone like me?" Mr. Wilson's eyes softened as he took a step closer. "Because you reminded me of myself, Sarah. I see in you the strength and resilience it takes to keep going, even when everything seems impossible. I've spent years building a life for myself, but I never forgot the people who helped me along the way. You didn't know who I was when you stopped to help me, and that's why I'm here. You have a good heart, and that's worth more than anything." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She had always been the one to keep it together, to stay strong for her kids, but in that moment, it all hit her. The years of struggling, of working herself to the bone, of never asking for help because she didn't want to seem weak. And now, standing here with a man who genuinely wanted to help, it felt like the weight of the world was finally lifting off her shoulders. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to thank me," Mr. Wilson said softly. "Just take care of yourself and your kids. That's all I ask." Sarah wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She could feel the tension inside her slowly fading away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was as if, for the first time, she could actually see a future where things weren't always so hard. A future where her kids didn't have to go without, where she didn't have to worry about bills piling up, or how she would make it through the month. Mr. Wilson smiled again and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "There's one more thing I wanted to give you," he said, handing it to her. Sarah opened it, her eyes widening in disbelief. Inside was an invitation to a charity event, one hosted by none other than Mr. Wilson himself. It was an event where he would be making a significant donation to causes that supported struggling families like hers, and he wanted her to be there as his guest of honor. "I want people to hear your story, Sarah," he said. "I want them to see that kindness and generosity can change lives. You're proof of that." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not only had Mr. Wilson given her a way out of her financial struggles, but he also wanted to help others through her story. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Wilson and the man from the diner said their goodbyes, leaving Sarah standing at her door, the envelope still in her hand. She looked down at it, then at the check, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to smile, really smile. The next morning, Sarah sat down with her kids and told them everything. She explained how a simple act of kindness had changed their lives forever, how one moment of helping someone else had led to an opportunity she never could have imagined. And as she watched their faces light up with excitement and hope, she knew she had made the right choice. Life didn't magically become perfect after that day. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but Sarah now had something she hadn't had before: support. And as she stood by her kids' side, knowing that their future was bright, she felt a deep sense of peace